What if a Christian text was buried not because it denied Christ, but because it made the church unnecessary? This book did not vanish by accident. It disappeared because it shifted power, because it refused to locate salvation in obedience, because it placed truth beyond walls, beyond altars, beyond control. The Gospel of Philip emerged in a world where authority was being forged, creeds hardened, offices formed, lines were drawn. And then a text appeared that treated ritual as symbol, not leverage. A text that spoke of knowledge as liberation, not permission. If salvation did not pass through hands that ruled, then those hands lost their grip. If awakening was inward, then fear moved outward. This was not heresy by denial. It was heresy by independence. The Gospel of Philip stood at a threshold. On one side, command, hierarchy, and fear. On the other, light recognized without intermediaries. What terrifies an institution is not rebellion, it is irrelevance. And so this teaching was pushed into shadow, not erased but hidden, waiting for the moment when the light could be remembered. Authority does not announce itself as fear. It announces itself as order. In the centuries after Jesus, Christianity was not yet a church. It was many voices, many teachings, many interpretations moving through homes, deserts, and underground gatherings. No single center ruled belief. No final gate decided truth. That instability frightened those who sought permanence. As communities grew, leaders emerged who promised unity through structure. Bishops replaced elders. Creeds replaced dialogue. Obedience became proof of faith. And salvation slowly shifted from transformation to compliance. Texts were no longer read only for wisdom. They were judged for usefulness. Did a writing reinforce authority? Did it justify hierarchy? Did it stabilize control? If it did, it was preserved. If it did not, it became dangerous. The Gospel of Philip belonged to this second category. It did not attack Jesus. It did not deny resurrection. It did something far more threatening. It refused to anchor salvation in the institution forming around it. Where emerging church leaders spoke of correct belief, Philip spoke of recognition. Where authority demanded ritual obedience, Philip treated ritual as symbol. Where bishops claimed exclusive power to mediate salvation, Philip implied that awakening could not be granted by another. This was not merely theological disagreement. It was a struggle over control of meaning. To allow such a text to circulate freely would fracture the claim that truth flowed downward through ordained hands. It would suggest that authority was not inherited, but discovered. By the 4th century, this tension reached a breaking point. Councils decided which texts defined Christianity. Uniformity replaced plurality. The canon closed. And writings like the Gospel of Philip were labeled suspect, not because they contradicted doctrine, but because they dissolved dependency. When a text teaches that salvation is not administered, authority trembles. When it implies that no ritual works without understanding, power weakens. When it suggests that truth is remembered rather than granted, institutions feel exposed. So the Gospel of Philip was excluded, copied less, named less, moved quietly out of sight, not destroyed everywhere, but displaced. It crossed a threshold from teaching to threat. And the church learned that silence could be more effective than fire. Suppression rarely begins with flames, it begins with classification. When church authorities encountered texts like the Gospel of Philip, they did not rush to destroy them. They first asked a quieter question: who benefits if this is read? The answer unsettled them. Philip did not reject baptism, it reframed it. Philip did not deny resurrection, it challenged its timing. Philip did not mock ritual, it stripped ritual of automatic power. One line alone revealed the danger. Truth did not come into the world naked, but it came in types and images. This sentence dissolved literalism. If truth arrived clothed in symbol, then authority could not monopolize meaning. Interpretation became unavoidable. And interpretation could not be fully controlled. Another passage pressed deeper. Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, when they die, they will receive nothing. This was not merely theology. It was a threat to institutional timing. If resurrection was inward and present, then the church could not position itself as the future gatekeeper of salvation. If transformation occurred now, then fear of judgment later lost its leverage. The Gospel of Philip did not attack authority directly. It bypassed it. Early church leaders understood the implications immediately. A believer who no longer feared delay, punishment, or exclusion was difficult to govern. A believer who sought understanding rather than approval could not be easily disciplined. So the response was strategic. Philip was labeled obscure, too symbolic, too dangerous for the untrained, too easily misunderstood. And then, quietly, it was excluded, not condemned in grand councils, not burned in public squares, simply left out of lists, left out of readings, left out of memory. Suppression works best when it appears reasonable. If a text could not be banned outright, it could be marginalized. If it could not be disproven, it could be reframed as unnecessary. If it could not be silenced, it could be buried under orthodoxy. Over time, Christianity became identified not by awakening, but by assent, not by recognition, but by belief, not by interchange, but by external alignment. The Gospel of Philip resisted this shift. It insisted that symbols without understanding were empty, that rituals without awareness were illusions, that authority without insight produced imitation, not transformation. Such ideas could not coexist with a church that claimed exclusive access to grace. So Philip crossed another threshold, from tolerated writing to suppressed memory. It would remain hidden for centuries, not erased, waiting, because texts that threaten power are never truly destroyed. They are delayed, and delay too is a form of fear. Once suppression was complete, the deeper danger could be ignored. The Gospel of Philip did not merely challenge authority. It redefined what salvation was. This is where the text crosses a threshold. Philip speaks in fragments, not because it is confused, but because it assumes initiation. It does not explain from above. It invites recognition from within. One passage states plainly, "Light and darkness, life and death, right and left are brothers of one another. They are inseparable." This was explosive. If opposites were intertwined rather than opposed, then moral control through fear weakened. If light was not granted by separation, then purity laws lost their leverage. The church depended on division to enforce belonging. Philip dissolved division at its root. The text repeatedly returns to one unsettling idea. Ignorance is the true bondage. Those who have knowledge are free. This freedom was not political. It was internal. And that made it impossible to regulate. In the Gospel of Philip, rituals exist, but they are not magical. They are mirrors. Truth did not come into the world naked, but it came in types and images. This means baptism is not a transaction. It is a sign. The Eucharist is not a guarantee. It is a symbol pointing inward. For the institutional church, this interpretation was intolerable. If rites functioned only when understood, then priests could not claim automatic power. If symbols required awareness, then authority could not be transferred mechanically. If transformation was internal, then no external structure could complete it for you. Philip describes the human condition as exile without distance. The world came into being through a mistake. This line was not cosmological rebellion. It was psychological exposure. The mistake was not creation itself. It was misrecognition. The error was mistaking symbols for substance, forms for truth, institutions for light. This reframing made control fragile. Fear depends on delayed salvation. Hierarchy depends on mediated access. But Philip places liberation at the threshold of understanding. Now, not later. The Gospel of Philip does not ask you to wait. It asks you to see. This is why it could not be integrated. It did not oppose the church from the outside. It hollowed it from within. If knowledge awakens, authority fades. If recognition transforms, fear dissolves. And once fear dissolves, control collapses. This was the teaching that could not be preached safely. It could only be whispered, passed quietly, hidden in fragments. The Gospel of Philip became a text for thresholds, for those standing between belief and knowing, between obedience and awakening, between shadow and light. And so it waited for readers willing to cross. Once authority was challenged and suppression secured, the Gospel of Philip turned inward, not toward escape, toward recognition. Here the text reveals why it was feared long after it was silenced. Philip does not describe salvation as rescue. It describes it as remembering. The light and the darkness, life and death, right and left, are brothers of one another. This is not poetry for comfort. It is instruction. If light is not the enemy of darkness, then fear loses its compass. If division is illusion, then domination becomes unnecessary. The Gospel of Philip insists that ignorance, not sin, is the true captivity. Those who say they know the truth, but do not know themselves, are in error. This is devastating to systems built on external correction. You cannot punish someone into recognition. You cannot command awareness. Philip speaks of redemption as awakening while alive. Those who have received the resurrection while they live will not fear death. Fear was the church's most effective instrument. Fear of judgment, fear of exclusion, fear of delay. Philip dissolves all three. Resurrection is not postponed. It is present. It occurs when illusion breaks. The text describes humanity as asleep inside images. Names given to worldly things are very deceptive, for they turn the heart away from what is real to what is unreal. This was not an attack on belief. It was an exposure of substitution. When symbols replace truth, people submit to forms. When rituals replace understanding, authority becomes mechanical. When names replace experience, control becomes effortless. Philip restores danger by restoring perception. Baptism is not power. It is sign. The Eucharist is not possession. It is reminder. The Lord did everything in a mystery, a baptism and a chrism, and a Eucharist, and a redemption, and a bridal chamber. These are not steps in a hierarchy. They are mirrors of transformation. The bridal chamber especially terrified later theology. It symbolized inner union, not institutional mediation, union of what was split, light recognized within light. This was not something a church could administer. If transformation occurs through insight, then obedience becomes secondary. If wholeness emerges through recognition, then authority becomes optional. The Gospel of Philip never tells you to reject the world. It tells you to see through it. The world is a corpse eater. This is not condemnation. It is diagnosis. A world built on appearances feeds on forgetting. It survives by keeping people asleep inside symbols they do not understand. Philip offers no rebellion, only clarity. And clarity is more destabilizing than revolt. Once the light is recognized, fear loses its hold. Once fear dissolves, power weakens. Once power weakens, structures collapse from within. This is why the Gospel of Philip was never meant to be debated publicly. It was meant to be encountered privately, at the threshold, between what you were told and what you suddenly see. Light does not argue, it reveals. Once light is recognized, illusion becomes visible. The Gospel of Philip does not describe illusion as deception imposed from outside. It describes it as consented misunderstanding, a quiet agreement to mistake the symbol for the source. People do not see what they are seeing. They see only what they are told to see. This is the danger Philip exposes. Not false belief, but unexamined belief. Illusion thrives where repetition replaces insight, where rituals are performed without awareness, where words are memorized without meaning. Philip does not reject the sacred. It rejects automation. When a ritual is believed to work regardless of understanding, power shifts away from the participant. Meaning becomes outsourced. Authority becomes external. This is why the text insists again and again that ignorance is the real captivity. Those who have knowledge are free, but those who do not know are slaves. This freedom is not granted, it is realized, and that realization cannot be regulated. The Gospel of Philip repeatedly warns against mistaking form for substance. Truth is like ignorance to those who do not understand it. This is not elitism, it is consequence. Without recognition, symbols remain opaque. Without insight, rites remain empty. The institutional church required continuity. Continuity required predictability. Predictability required that rituals function the same for everyone, regardless of inner state. Philip quietly dismantles this assumption. It teaches that no transformation occurs without awareness. No redemption operates without recognition. No symbol delivers power on its own. This is why the text was dangerous, even when unread. It implied that the system itself could not guarantee salvation. Illusion, according to Philip, is sustained by misplacement. Light is sought outside. Authority is assigned elsewhere. Truth is delayed. But the text insists that delay itself is illusion. When we see ourselves, then we will see ourselves truly. This moment collapses the hierarchy. If truth is recognized inwardly, then external validation loses weight. If awakening occurs internally, then no gatekeeper can block it. This does not produce chaos. It produces responsibility. No one can save you. No one can complete this for you. No ritual substitutes for understanding. This was unacceptable to an institution built on mediation. The Gospel of Philip does not promise comfort. It removes excuses. Illusion dissolves when dependence dissolves. And dependence was the currency of power. This is why the text was not merely excluded. It was forgotten deliberately, because once illusion is seen, it cannot be unseen. And once authority is exposed as symbolic rather than absolute, fear no longer obeys. The Gospel of Philip waits precisely at this moment, when the symbol cracks, and the light behind it becomes visible, not as doctrine, as recognition. Transformation in the Gospel of Philip is not improvement, it is reversal, not a change in behavior, a change in seeing. By the time the text reaches its final movement, authority has already collapsed. Fear has been exposed, illusion has been named. What remains is responsibility. Philip does not promise salvation as a reward. It describes it as an outcome of recognition. Those who say they are free while they are slaves of desire are slaves of freedom. This is not moralism. It is precision. Freedom without understanding becomes another illusion. Transformation without awareness becomes imitation. The Gospel of Philip insists that awakening must be embodied, not performed, not proclaimed, lived. This is why the text speaks of becoming rather than believing. You saw the Spirit, you became Spirit. You saw Christ, you became Christ. This was intolerable to systems that depended on separation. Clergy and laity, teacher and student, mediator and dependent. Philip collapses these divisions quietly. If recognition transforms identity, then no permanent hierarchy can survive. If knowing alters being, then authority becomes temporary at best. The text describes transformation as crossing a threshold that cannot be uncrossed. When the blind see, they will not return to blindness. This is why suppression was necessary. A transformed person cannot be governed by fear. A person who no longer delays salvation cannot be controlled by promise. A person who recognizes light within does not seek permission. The Gospel of Philip offers no rebellion. It offers clarity. And clarity reorganizes life from the inside. This is where the church's anxiety becomes understandable, not justified, but visible. An institution can survive disagreement. It cannot survive irrelevance. Philip does not destroy ritual. It restores it. Baptism becomes awakening. Eucharist becomes remembrance. The bridal chamber becomes inner union. Not ceremonies administered by power, but symbols enacted through understanding. This kind of transformation spreads silently. It does not need preaching. It does not require enforcement. It moves person to person, recognition to recognition. This is why the text endured despite suppression, not as doctrine, as seed, hidden, dormant, waiting for minds capable of seeing without instruction. The Gospel of Philip does not ask you to believe it. It asks something more dangerous, to see whether it is already true. And if it is, then transformation is no longer optional. What was feared was never the text itself. It was what the text awakened. The Gospel of Philip did not vanish because it was false. It vanished because it was unnecessary to control, because it taught that light does not arrive through permission. It is recognized at the threshold of understanding. When authority fades, responsibility begins. When fear dissolves, peace appears. Not the peace of obedience, but the peace of clarity. This is why the text still matters, not as a relic, as a mirror. What was hidden waits only for recognition. What was delayed asks to be remembered now. And what was silenced returns quietly. Whenever someone crosses the threshold and sees, in the next chapter of this journey, another suppressed voice waits. Another teaching buried not for denial, but for revelation. If this light resonates, remain here, walk with us, listen, and if you wish, mark this threshold with a gesture of presence, a quiet subscription, a sign that the remembering continues. The light was never lost, only waiting to be remembered.